I just finished a hiking trip with my friends Mitch, Stan and Courtney. Mitch is currently attempting the world's longest and highest triathlon in the world. He started in England, swam to France, cycled to India, ran to Kathmandu, Nepal's capital city, and will be joining him as he walks from Kathmandu to Everest Base Camp. I documented this all on my Instagram and TikTok with daily videos, but if you haven't seen them yet, or you just want to watch them again, here they are. Day 1 of hiking from Kathmandu to Everest Base Camp. This morning, me and Courtney got ready, all excited for a few weeks of trekking. But first, we got invited into the British Embassy here in Kathmandu, together with the rest of the team for a bangin' breakfast. Mitch then took some photos, and then we started walking, back to the palace, which is where he finished his 900-kilometer run a few weeks back. We started with 8 of us, but after a few kilometers we said goodbye to Gelji, Adriana and her mum. And then, a little while later, we also had to say goodbye to Mitch's girlfriend, Nikki. For the next 2 weeks or so, it will just be the 4 of us. So after Courtney gave us some Canadian snacks and we strapped Stan into his backpack, it was time to get a move on. Today's goal was mainly to get out of the city, as the dust, the fumes and the hectic traffic somehow aren't very relaxing. And luckily, towards the end of the day, we made it to the Water Kingdom resort. We were very excited to go for a swim, but unfortunately for us, the water park itself has been closed for quite a while now due to some legal issues. So instead, we just had some dinner and called it a night. Day 2 of hiking from Kathmandu to Everest Base Camp. We had a very quick breakfast this morning, and then Courtney and Mitch had a rather lengthy discussion about how to use Strava. We then started walking, ready for another 20 kilometers today. The road will get more quiet soon, but for now it was still rather dusty, and we walked for a few hours before Mitch realized he's lost his sunglasses. Luckily, a little while later we made it to a town where he bought some new ones, and we quickly stopped for some tea and to shoot a few sponsored videos. Mitch then decided he wasn't carrying enough yet, so he also bought some flip-flops, and a little while later the road started to get quiet. Little Stanley couldn't hack the weight of all his camera equipment, so I gave him my bag and then carried his big boy backpack for him. It honestly went quite well, until we made it to the 1,000 steps, which really took it out of me, and by the time we made it to this Buddha statue, I was absolutely exhausted. But at least the views were worth it. To recover a bit, we ate some noodles, and then the owner of the restaurant told us about a little shortcut leading back to the main road, again with stunning views of the surroundings. We then found a bike on a stick, no idea why that's here, and after a few more dodgy roads we reached the 20-kilometer mark and found a hotel. Unfortunately for us, it was closed, so we had to keep going, and a little while later we ran into this lovely couple who invited us into their homestay just down the road. We got welcomed with some tea and popcorn, which was a bit unexpected, but nice, and then for dinner we milked the cow and made some momos. I was slightly worried about them, as I'm not the best cook, but they actually ended up being really tasty. Day 3 of hiking from Kathmandu to Mount Everest Base Camp. We started the day with some leftover momos and pancakes, and then, after we got ready, the owners of the guest house offered to bless us for the rest of our journey. I didn't know this, but the dot on my forehead is called a bindi, and to my own surprise I actually managed to keep mine on all day without sweating it off. The views were once again beautiful today, so Stan decided to take his drone up, but then quickly ran out of battery, so he had to make a bit of an emergency landing and managed to find it after a few minutes, without a scratch. It was also quite a hot day, which I think it will be for quite a while, so we made sure to have plenty of water breaks along the way. We then came across this stream, which will eventually turn into a river that will follow for the next week or so, and we also started to see our first few landslide affected areas, which are unfortunately really common here in Nepal. At lunch, the owner told us that we probably won't be able to find a hotel, as one side of the road is completely washed away. But that the locals are extremely friendly, and that if we ask anyone we meet, they'll probably offer us a place to sleep. Courtney then tried to steal all our bags, but as it turns out, she's not very quick, so we managed to catch her, and then, a little while later, we came across even more landslide affected areas. The road we were meant to walk on completely disappeared, but luckily for us, a new road was already being built. We continued walking, and after a few more near misses with cars and landslides, we made it to a town 22 kilometers into today's trek. We wanted to stay here, but unfortunately there were no hotels around whatsoever, so we kept walking, and a few kilometers later we finally found a hotel for the night. We were exhausted and covered in blisters, so we checked in, had some dal bhat and called it a night.
Right on, bro.
I was close, actually.
Day 4 of hiking from Kathmandu to Everest Base Camp. We had a very quick and simple breakfast this morning, and since we're staying right next to the road, we were back to walking in no time, ready for another big day. We once again followed the river for most of the day, and the river might be small now, but it can be quite hectic during rainy season, wiping out anything and everything that stands in its way. Because it's quite dry at the moment though, we could actually walk along the riverbed for a while, avoiding some pretty steep hills on the road, so that was nice. We had a coffee break next to the river, and Stan and Courtney actually went for a swim. I thought about joining them, but my feet are actually covered in plasters at the moment, and I couldn't be asked to reapply them all. After a bit more walking, we stopped for lunch, and we thought about crossing the river to walk on the other side for a bit. But looking back at it now, I'm really glad that we didn't, as there were multiple places where the road was just fully wiped out, and we would have probably had to turn around. In the afternoon, we started gaining some altitude again, and I saw these locals who were building what I think is a bridge across the river. I then spent some time waiting for everyone else to catch up to me again. Turns out Stan had been projectile vomiting, so they were slightly delayed, but eventually they caught up and we walked the last bit to the guest house. On our way we saw this guy casually pedaling down a river on a tube. Absolutely no idea where he was going, but I feel like we should give it a go ourselves, as it honestly looks so relaxing. And then, a few minutes later, we arrived at our guest house for the night. Unfortunately for us, the room smelled like sewage, but the owner was super friendly and allowed us to put up our tents on the rooftop. And then he made us some amazing food and we just relaxed for the rest of the afternoon.
That's the reason why sometimes I'm feeling under. That's the reason why sometimes I'm feeling down. There's no wonder why sometimes I'm feeling under. Gotta keep my faith, my life, and love is found.
Day 5 of hiking from Kathmandu to Everest Base Camp. We woke up in our tents because the hotel rooms smell like poo. And today we're being joined by Mark, who drove down here from Kathmandu to come and trek with us for the day. He also brought Stan some proper hiking boots, which were more than needed. And then we said goodbye to the friendly staff and started walking. We first cut through some small villages, away from the main road, which was quite nice for a change. But eventually that ended and we had to rejoin the main road. The road then zigzagged up into the mountains and we thought we had found another little shortcut. But, unfortunately, we very quickly ran into a fair few landslides. Trying to get across them honestly felt extremely dodgy, but nowhere near as dodgy as trying to avoid being hit by buses on the main road. We couldn't find anywhere for lunch, but luckily we had these dehydrated meals which came in really handy. And then everyone went for a little swim, except for me, because my feet were still in bits and I didn't fancy getting them wet. After lunch we had another steep hill to climb, and at this point I was absolutely knackered, and so was Stan, but we only had a little bit to go, so we pushed on and eventually made it to this guest house. The place was actually surprisingly nice, and we relaxed for the rest of the afternoon and then had another banging dal bhat for dinner. Day 6 of hiking from Kathmandu to Everest Base Camp. Today was another fairly big day, so we started early and Mark will actually be with us for the first few hours before turning around and heading back to Kathmandu. It wasn't long before the road started zigzagging up and we thought that we had found a little shortcut. But unfortunately for us, the last bit of the path was wiped away by a landslide and we had to do a bit of climbing to get back to the main road. The river we've been following for the past few days joined another river, making it even bigger, and then, after we had some roadside orange juice, it was time for us to say goodbye to Mark. The four of us kept walking and we passed a few big villages, but for most of it, the road was very quiet. I started daydreaming a bit, and before I realized it, I was miles ahead of everyone else. And instead of waiting for them, I decided to push on to give myself an early finish. I walked through some beautiful scenery, and since we've now turned onto a smaller road, there were a lot less cars than the past few days. I skipped lunch, kept walking, and just before 2 PM I reached our goal for the day. It was actually a fairly big town, so I found a hotel, got all cleaned up, and then, 2 hours later, everyone else finally arrived. We had some spicy food, and then we went out into town where we found a guy selling fried donut balls, ice cream and tea, which was a beautiful way to end the day. Day 7 of hiking from Kathmandu to Everest Base Camp. Yesterday we had some extremely spicy noodles for dinner, and today we accidentally ordered the exact same thing for breakfast, which wasn't great. Don't get me wrong, it was still tasty, but my mouth was on fire, which isn't the best way to start the day. Despite this, the rest of the day honestly went pretty well. My body is slowly getting used to walking 20 kilometers a day, and the blisters on my feet are healing as well. Stan and Courtney struggled a fair bit today, but after we had some dal bhat for lunch, we were all feeling great, and Courtney even decided to go for a little run.
We also came across even more landslides, but this one was actually getting repaired, and seeing the process was very interesting. One of the only issues we had today was a herd of goats blocking the road. But even that wasn't really an issue, as we were taking a different road anyways. We then had one last break for the day, stocked up on water, and then made our way down to the riverbed where we went for a swim and set up camp for the night. There are no hotels around, but it's not the end of the world, as this place is absolutely beautiful.
Day 8 of hiking from Kathmandu to Everest Base Camp.
This morning I woke up at 6 AM, quietly packed up my tent, and then I carried 3 backpacks up to the main road. I'm actually hitchhiking to today's end destination, drop off our heavy bags, and then I'm coming all the way back to do the hike with everyone else. I wasn't sure how hard it was gonna be to hitchhike with 3 big bags, but as it turns out, it was surprisingly easy, and I very quickly got picked up by a friendly truck driver who could take me all the way there. I spent about an hour in the truck, and knowing we'd have to walk all this way later today wasn't exactly reassuring, but the fact that we could do it without carrying our bags did help a fair bit. Once I got dropped off, I found a hotel to leave our bags at, and then I made my way back to our campsite from last night. By the time I finally made it, everyone else had already left. So I started walking and very quickly started to see some fresh footprints in the sand. I didn't have to follow them for long before I found Mitch, Stan and Courtney having some coffee on the side of the road. We still had a bit of equipment to carry, but nowhere near as much as we had been for the past week. So it honestly felt ridiculously easy today. But despite it being easy, it was still a fair bit uphill and it was hot, so once we saw a nice restaurant on the side of the road, we stopped for some quick drinks. We then kept walking, and a little while later, Mitch disappeared into the bushes with some toilet paper and told us not to follow him. A few hours later we found a restaurant with some chickens outside, inside and on our plate. The road was quiet and everything went really well, until we had to cross this bridge. Courtney's scared of heights and somehow decided the best way to cross is to run, which I think is kinda silly, but we all made it across, and after 25 kilometers of walking we made it to our end destination and very quickly called it a night.
Day 9 of hiking from Kathmandu to Everest Base Camp.
Today we're in Gurmi, and because we won't be camping over the next few days, we're actually leaving some of our equipment in this guest house. And someone will drive it more than 100 kilometers down the road for us to collect once we get there. Because of this, our packs were actually incredibly light, so we were all very excited to get going. Not only that, but today was also a short day, and we only had to walk 17 kilometers, but pretty much all of that was uphill. We first went down to the river at 300 meters above sea level, and then, from here, we're climbing all the way up to 1500 meters. We were all excited to finally start gaining some serious altitude, but didn't realize how exhausting today was actually going to be. At first we all stuck together, but I accidentally wandered off on my own again, daydreaming, and when I made it to this viewpoint, I waited a little while for everyone else to catch up with me. We then continued, looking for a restaurant to have some lunch, and after Google Maps initially pointed us in the wrong direction, we eventually managed to find it. Right as we arrived, a group of bikers was leaving, and it was nice to talk to some other travelers for a change. The food was delicious too, and then, right after lunch, Stan crashed his drone again. Mitch climbed down and we expected the worst, but luckily it survived the crash, which is good because I doubt that we'll see a drone store anytime soon. With the drone recovered, we pushed on, and not too long after we made it to our destination for the day. We watched some kids play football, and then, to our surprise, the place we were staying at actually sold ice cream, milkshakes, and even what can only be described as a banging chicken burger.
Day 10 of hiking from Kathmandu to Everest Base Camp.
We left bright and early today, ready for another big day. Just like yesterday, today was also a lot of uphill. The only difference being that this time, after going up, we'd have to come all the way back down and finish the day at pretty much the same altitude as we started, which is a bit frustrating. It was also a fairly big day, nearly 25 kilometers, but because we found a few shortcuts, we managed to shave off a couple of kilometers. Courtney had some stomach issues today, but I'll spare you the details. And after a fairly short morning stint, we stopped for some lunch. We then heard about an even bigger shortcut. So we left the main road and pretty quickly ran into a big group of vultures, which was really cool. As we went on, the road kept getting smaller and smaller, and we were worried it was going to end. We considered turning around, but decided to keep going, and after a very long time on some very narrow paths, we eventually rejoined the main road. From here, it was just a short stint to where we'll be spending the night. We passed the pink house on our way, and before we knew it, we already made it to the hotel, which was actually surprisingly clean. The rest of the afternoon, like most days, were pretty chill, and we didn't get up too much. But thanks to all our shortcuts today, we actually managed to save a fair bit of distance, which was really nice.
Day 11 of hiking from Kathmandu to Everest Base Camp.
Today was gonna be a long day. It wasn't too far distance-wise, only about 18 kilometers, but pretty much all of that was uphill. We left the city behind and straight away started climbing. We followed the road for most of the day, but every now and again there were a few small shortcuts avoiding the main road. Most of these shortcuts saved us some time, but with this one we needed to be somewhere up there, and it ended up taking us quite a long time to climb up this mountain. We then continued before we eventually stopped for some lovely lunch on the side of the road. After lunch it was more uphill, but we didn't have far to go, and this time we were joined by a dog, which happens quite often here in Nepal. They will literally just follow you around from one town to the next, and this one actually stayed with us till the end of the day, when we checked into a guest house and Mitch and Courtney helped prepare some dinner. We've got a few more days until we make it to Lukla, and then from there, the real base camp trek will begin.
Day 12 of hiking from Kathmandu to Everest Base Camp.
This morning was the first time that we actually had a proper view of the Himalayas, and it was absolutely stunning. Today was meant to be a really big day, nearly 30 kilometers, but luckily we managed to find a fair few shortcuts along the way. It was also downhill pretty much the entire morning, which made us really pick up the pace. And then, a few hours in, we met a dog that ended up staying with us for the rest of the day. We crossed this bridge, and then we made it to the river, which will be our lowest point of the day. Since we had plenty of time, we all decided to go for a little swim. And the water was absolutely freezing, which wasn't great. We then had some fried noodles to warm up again, and after a few more hours of walking uphill, we eventually saw our end destination for the day, Paplu. This town is actually where the paved road to the Himalayas ends. And then from here it's another 2 days of walking to Lukla, which is where most people fly into when coming to the Everest region.
Day 13 of hiking from Kathmandu to Everest Base Camp.
We've walked about 250 kilometers in the past 12 days, so today we decided to take a rest day here in Paplu. We really just took this day to relax and explore the city a bit. And then at the end of the day we watched a movie called Everest, which is about a bunch of people dying on Mount Everest.
Day 14 of hiking from Kathmandu to Everest Base Camp.
We were feeling great after a rest day yesterday and we were ready to get going. Unfortunately, Courtney lost her earphones, but life goes on, so we started walking. Today we were joined by the same dog that has been with us since 2 days ago. And from here on we'll also be accompanied by Tenji and Pasangelji, who both work for AGA, the company that Mitch is summiting Everest with. A road is currently being built all the way to Lukla, but it's not quite finished yet. So we'll be following it for part of the way, but we'll also be on a fair few smaller trails. Stan took his drone out again today and he actually didn't crash it for once, so that was nice. We then crossed some water and after that we unfortunately had to go uphill. The only one who didn't seem to struggle with it was the dog, and once we made it all the way to the top we stopped for some lunch. We then went downhill for pretty much the rest of the afternoon. We did have to cross a suspension bridge again, and Courtney is getting a bit better at them every time. Which is good, because we've still got a few dozen more to go. We also had to leave Stan behind for a few minutes so he could sort out his stomach, but eventually he rejoined us. We kept walking, and as it turns out, today's end goal was slightly too ambitious. So when it was starting to get dark and we passed a nice looking guest house, we checked in and called it a day. Today was definitely our biggest day of the entire trip, so we were absolutely exhausted and very quickly called it a night.
Day 15 of hiking from Kathmandu to Everest Base Camp.
Today we had one last big push to Lukla and it was gonna be a long day. Lots of up, lots of down and a total distance of 27 kilometers. After about an hour we had some coffee and then we carried on for a little while longer until we stopped for lunch. It was still very early in the day, but apparently this was the last good lunch spot for the day. So we ordered some food and relaxed in the sun. After we were all fed, we continued walking, and unfortunately we stumbled upon a digger that had fallen down the cliff. No idea if there was someone in there when it happened, but if there was, it probably didn't end well. Either way, unfortunately there's nothing we could do to help. So we kept going, and after a few more sweaty hours we could finally see Lukla in the distance. We weren't quite there yet though. We first had to drop all the way down to the bottom of a valley, only to then climb all the way back up again on the other side. This river is as far as jeeps can go, and they mainly bring supplies for the 50,000 tourists visiting this region every year. From here, everything gets loaded onto donkeys, yaks and humans. And then it gets carried the final few kilometers up the hill to Lukla. After 15 days we finally made it, and now we've got 5 days before the rest of the team arrives. So no videos about the next few days unfortunately, as we'll just be resting and won't do anything interesting. But after that we'll be back, ready for the final stretch to base camp.
Day 20 of hiking from Kathmandu to Everest Base Camp.
Alright, I know I just skipped a few days, but we've been stuck in Lukla waiting for the rest of the team to arrive. And then on top of that, I had some pretty serious food poisoning. So yeah, not that much to report really. But now we're back, and after a few failed attempts this morning, the team finally managed to land in Lukla. Mitch will be summiting Everest with a company called AGA, led by Adri and Gelgi, who are both absolutely amazing people. And to make this final leg a bit more sociable, Mitch invited his followers to join him on a group trip to Everest Base Camp. Just like everything else, this is also being organized by AGA. And even though me and Courtney are not technically part of the group, they were still kind enough to let us tag along. Walking with such a big group does mean we'll go a lot slower, but because of the altitude we're at right now, that's probably a good thing. We did about 7.5 kilometers the first day before we checked into a guest house and all had some dinner. The rest of the team didn't sleep all night as they were making their way to Lukla, so everyone was very tired and we all went to bed very early.
Day 21 of hiking from Kathmandu to Everest Base Camp.
Today we're going to Namche, which is by far the biggest town in the whole region. It wasn't a very far day, but pretty much the entire day was uphill, so like most days we took it easy. We're not in a rush, the sun is shining and life is good. We did get stuck in a fair few donkey trains today, and because there's like 30 of us, we don't really have any other choice than to just wait and let them pass. Today we were also officially entering the national park, and after we were all checked in, Geltje showed us all the mountains in the region. We then stopped for some lunch, and after lunch a small group of us temporarily said goodbye to everyone else as we wanted to go bungee jumping. I had no idea that this was even possible. But apparently since last year you can now jump off one of the suspension bridges, which looked too good to pass up on. Mitch wanted a good video, and after taping his phone to his hand, we found out they actually give you a GoPro to record yourself with. I was a bit nervous at first, but once I jumped, all that disappeared and it honestly felt absolutely brilliant. So if you're ever in the area, I definitely recommend jumping off a bridge. By the time we had all jumped, the rest of the group was already in Namche. So we had a bit of catching up to do, which was really easy as Courtney made sure we were all well fed. It was uphill the entire way, but thanks to Courtney's potatoes we made great progress, and after a little while we made it to Namche. It's honestly mad how big this city is, especially given the fact that it's in the middle of the mountains. But because it's this big, there's also quite a lot to do, and they've even got a pub here. We'll be here for another day tomorrow to relax, and then, after that, we'll continue our trek to base camp.
Day 22 of hiking from Kathmandu to Everest Base Camp.
And today we'll be staying in Namche. When you get as high up as we are, you need some time to adapt to the altitude. So unfortunately, you can't be on the move every single day. We did go for a little walk up a mountain to keep busy and also to slowly get our bodies used to the higher altitude. And it was honestly really nice and relaxing. Once we got to the top, we could see a fair few mountains. And after we had some tea, we headed back towards Namche. On our way, we passed by some kind of rubbish museum that tries to make people aware of everything left behind on Everest each year. And then for some reason, they also had a VR headset with which you could climb Everest in 3 minutes. So that was cool. We then made our way down into the city where we spent the rest of the day relaxing, eating great food and getting ready for another day of hiking tomorrow.
Day 23 of hiking from Kathmandu to Everest Base Camp.
After some breakfast this morning, we all got ready and left Namche Bazaar. Initially it was a short climb to leave the town, but then from there it was pretty even for the rest of the morning. We saw 2 birds on our way, not sure what kind of birds they are, but they're cool. And then we kinda just kept walking until we first stopped for some tea and a little while later for some lunch. We then had to cross this river, but luckily someone had built a bridge, so that made things a lot easier. And then from here it was pretty much all uphill. To make things worse, it also started raining. But it wasn't too bad to be fair. We took it slow and after a few hours we made it to Dingboche. From here, it was just a short downhill section to our final destination for the day. We checked in, put on some dry clothes, and then me and Mitch saw some kind of mountain goat outside. The views from the lodge were also absolutely stunning. I've never seen anything quite like it. Today has been a good day, and tomorrow is meant to be even better, but I guess we'll have to wait till then to find out.
Day 24 of hiking from Kathmandu to Everest Base Camp.
Today is another uphill day, but it's a fairly gradual incline which makes it a lot easier. Just like yesterday, it was raining, but it was only a light rain, and after a few hours it started to clear up. Courtney's slowly getting better at crossing bridges, so that's good, and a little while later we saw some mountains and some mountain goats. After we stopped for tea, we continued and we could see the clouds rolling in. We were worried the rain was gonna start again, but luckily nothing ended up happening, and we walked a few more kilometers before stopping for lunch. I keep forgetting to film lunch, but it was nice, and from here it was a pretty flat walk until the final stretch of the day, which was a pretty steep climb. We reached Dingboche, but there was no electricity, so we ended up going into town looking for a cafe for Stan so he could edit some videos. And we actually managed to find a really nice one. We'll be in Dingboche for another day tomorrow to acclimatize, and then, after that, it's just another 2 days to base camp.
Day 25 of hiking from Kathmandu to Everest Base Camp.
Alright, a very short day today as we're having a rest day here in Dingboche. We're currently at 4,400 meters above sea level, and we did go for a little walk up to 4,700 meters to help us acclimatize better. Once we got there, it was actually quite cold, so we did a little dance to stay warm. But yeah, except for that, nothing really happened today, so I guess I'll see you all tomorrow.
Day 26 of hiking from Kathmandu to Everest Base Camp.
Today is our second to last day, so we were all quite excited to get moving, and as we left Dingboche, we had this absolutely beautiful view of Amadeblan. Courtney then tried to do a handstand, but eventually she gave up, and a little while later we stopped for some lunch. We thought we had it tough going uphill, but then we got humbled by this guy, carrying an espresso machine up the mountain. Not sure where he's going exactly, but I hope he's getting paid well. It also started snowing pretty badly, which made it cold, so we made sure to keep moving, and after about an hour we made it to the Everest Memorial. This whole area is dedicated to people who have lost their lives in the mountains, and seeing the sheer amount of monuments was very sobering. The weather cleared up a bit, and we walked a while longer before eventually reaching our end destination for the day, Dingboche. We had some dinner, and then we saw this absolutely beautiful mountain right outside our hotel. We're very close to base camp now. We're more than 400 kilometers into our journey, and we've only got one more day to go.
Day 27 of hiking from Kathmandu to Everest Base Camp.
And today, after nearly 4 weeks, we're finally reaching base camp. We first left Dingboche this morning and started a short walk to Gorak Shep. On our way, me, Stan and Gelje made a little detour to find Stan a home for the next few weeks. He'll be staying here, editing videos, until Mitch summits Everest. The place was actually really nice, but it's not time to check in quite yet, as we first need to make it to base camp. We picked up the pace and very quickly managed to catch up with the rest of the group. We then saw base camp in the distance for the first time ever, and not only that, but we could also actually see Everest itself. A little while later we made it to Gorak Shep, where we stopped for some lunch, and since this is where we will be staying tonight, we could also leave our backpacks here. Without any bags, I was feeling great, and before I knew it, we already made it to base camp. Massive thanks to Adri, Gelji and the rest of the AGA team for taking us along. It's been a wonderful experience, but unfortunately base camp is as far as we can go. So after looking around for a while, we headed back to Gorak Shep. The following day we said goodbye to Mitch and Stan, and then we walked all the way back to Lukla, got a ride to Kathmandu, and that's where we are now, ready for the next big adventure. Videos will be back in about a week or two, but in the meantime, if you want to see Mitch, Gelje and Puri summit Mount Everest in this record-breaking attempt, then please give them a follow.
Bye!